Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Vyzer Visionaries. I'm your host, Litan Yahav, and we're continuing our series diving deep into the challenges of managing complex wealth. Today, I'm thrilled to host our guest, Bob Veris. Bob is a leading voice in wealth management. He's also the editor of Inside Information and an award-winning journalist shaping the future of financial planning. It's such a pleasure to have you, Bob. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So before diving into the meat of it, I'd love to if you want to give our listeners a couple minute background of like who you are. You've been spending the past 30 years in this space. Just, high level background, that'd be great.
All right. And it's actually 44 years in this space. I came into the business in 1982 with no experience whatsoever. They asked me to be editor of a magazine called Financial Planning Magazine, and I was almost like the founding editor of it for something called the International Association for Financial Planning. And as I said, I knew nothing whatsoever about the field. And so the learning curve went straight up. And the most interesting thing about it is, I've been doing this, commenting on this industry as a editor for 10 years and as a newsletter writer for 30 years, more than 30 years, 34 years now. And the learning curve still goes straight up. There's still too much for me to handle in terms of change, in terms of what I need to learn, in terms of how to comment intelligently on where this business is going.
So before I dive into the meat of it and the future planning and all the research you've done, there's an elephant in the room that we need to address. And that's this thing called AI and how it's evolving and affecting every industry. I'd love to get your input on where do you think AI is going to play its biggest role in the wealth management, financial planning industry? A lot of people think it's going to destroy the profession. Some people think it's going to enable us to serve more. Where do you think this is going to affect us the most?
You have to talk about timeframes. The next 5 years, it's going to do this. Next 10 years, it's going to do that. Next 20 years, it's going to do something else. And then somewhere down the road, I'm looking forward to moderating a panel, and there's going to be 3 chairs. And there's going to be a computer on each of the chairs, and AI is going to be answering my questions. But that's way in the future. I'm not really expecting that anytime soon. The interesting thing about this is that when I was around when software was introduced into the financial planning profession. And the interesting thing about it was there were 3 responses. The first response was, I would never use something like this. My good old yellow pad is perfectly fine for handling client analysis. The second was, oh my God, we're doomed. We can't possibly compete with this computer. And the third was, hey, this is pretty cool. I can use this to leverage myself. And there are some really interesting client service and analysis I can do without having to do it by hand. And it's the same thing now. It's exactly the same situation now. There are 3 responses to AI. And the most logical of those 3 responses is, how do I leverage it? So to answer your question, finally, I think the first issue is client note-taking and being able to record client conversations and having an accurate view of what was actually said in the conversation. And instead of getting 90% or 85% of it, we now get 100% of it. A second use case, if you will, is the interface. I think all software is going to eventually have an AI interface, and you're already seeing that. Voice activated, tell me how to do this or do this for me or what have you. And then if you're talking about the profession, I think the thing that will come shortly after that is having AI bots sit on top of a data lake, which has all the client information that's relevant to the financial planning engagement. And you just query that for whatever you need. So whatever analysis you want to do, globally over all your clients or for individual clients, you can bring that information up into a customized calculation engine or a customized software program or AI-driven software program and figure things out. So advisors are already cyborgs. They're already using the internet. They're already doing research. They've got a CRM that's most of the things they remember about their clients is in the CRM. But this will take that whole cyborg concept to a whole new level.
That's super interesting. And I totally agree. We had to build our own AI layer on top of our own data set because we have our CRM and we have our portfolio management and planning software. And we wanted to know, all right, this morning, which clients do I need to reach out? Why do I need to reach out to them? And how do I reach out to them already with a predefined email? We had to build that exactly because of that reason, because we have a lot of data points that are disjointed and just bring them all into one place so we can do exactly that. And it's funny that you mentioned the AI note takers. I was at a wealth management conference a couple months ago, and every second booth at the conference was an AI note taker. And it was pretty mind blowing to me that that's like the AI implementations in the industry are all around those note takers. And I also get why, because to your point, it's lowest hanging fruit. You get 100% of the conversation recorded and action items are automated. And so you prevent things falling between the cracks. And that just makes so much sense. And I love the way you define those three categories.
That's the lowest AI hanging fruit.
It is, right. And also, are you seeing like the large firms implementing AI on those levels other than a note taker? Because you also mentioned sort of like interacting those interfaces. Have you seen that yet in the market?
I'm seeing a few AI interfaces on the commercially available software. Advisor 360 has it. Orion is developing it. There are some of them. So I think when most advisors, they're not going to build their own AI interface to something they already use. They're just going to be able to talk to their CRM and their financial planning program, which I think is going to unlock a whole lot of other features. Because, when you talk to the software developers, they say, oh, yeah, well, the problem is that every time they ask us to do something, our software gets more complicated. And every time our software gets more complicated, the average user only uses, 2/3 of what's available because we can't train them to use it all. But with an AI interface, software developers no longer have to fear adding features. And of course, AI writes code for them. So it's easier to add those features. So we're going to get richer and more interesting software out of this.
Yeah, the only problem is once you add AI layers on top is the hallucination that sometimes these AIs do, and then you can't bear that. And so there's this, yes, you can build faster and ship faster because you don't have to deal with UI or user experience as much. But on the flip side, you need to make sure that the prompts and the data that's returning is good, right? And not because you're depending on this brain that's a black box for most people that is going to return accurate answers, and you need to verify those, right?
Yeah, but I think really what we're talking about is a brute force programming effort on the part of the programmers and software developers. It's going to be brute force in the sense that I had to create all these drop down menus. Well, now I've got to connect with prompt engineering AI to every one of the drop down menus, and I've got to add context to that. And so really what I think we're talking about is engineering and brute force prompt engineering, a lot of work.
Yeah. Now, I want to take the conversation. All right. So that makes a lot of sense. But obviously, that will, as that evolves, there's implications towards, the structure of an organization in terms of the team members that exists. There's implications on the fees that they can charge from clients. There's implications on the revenue channels they can make. Like, how do you see that evolving?
Well, there's probably 5 or 6 threads we can follow. Let's follow one of them, and we can go from there. The first is that most of the software capabilities have been making it easier for the back office, not the front office. And so now with AI, we're just starting to begin to add conveniences to the front office, to the advisor who faces the client. But all those back office conveniences, which are now being enhanced by AI, making it less necessary to have those back office people spending all their time moving things around, filling out paperwork and what have you. And so what I'm envisioning is the first implication of this from a structural standpoint is that the people who handle check requests and the people who make the trades are going to be interacting with clients more often and providing better service, more attentive service, if you will, than a highly leveraged advisor can hope to do. So one of the interesting things about this is 80% of client calls can be handled by somebody who's not a financial planner. And it's typically more efficient to have that call go into the person who's actually going to handle the check request, or who's actually going to handle the trade, or who's actually going to send the latest performance report. So you're going to see a lot more traditional back office people doing front office work, doing client interaction work. And that's going to, I think, enhance client service. I think that's an important issue there. So that's one thread you can pull. Another thread is a lot of the questions that clients ask, that people want to know, the answer is out there on the internet. And so AI can give a plausible answer to those questions without going to the advisor who may not have that answer, who may, have to say, I'll get back to you. AI doesn't have to say, I'll get back to you. It says, after thoroughly searching the entire internet, here's what I found. So I think some of the routine interactions with advisors are going to be taken over by AI, and I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad effect on client relationships. I think advisors are going to have to get better at making check-in calls, hey, how's it going? I just want to find out if things can change. I was thinking about you, because the necessary interactions are going to be reduced. Does that make sense?
100%. They need to be more proactive. That makes, yeah, 100%.
And I think the other thing, too, is that it's going to drive financial planning services to lower levels of wealth. I've been writing for years that the financial planning profession somehow abandoned the middle market. Most of the people I grew up with, you can tell that, by the color of my hair, that some of my peers are aging, and they started out, they would take their friends and neighbors and work with them, and anybody who wanted and needed financial planning advice was welcome to come and be served. And then they started evolving minimums, and pretty soon the minimums were going up. And I think that's a problem for the profession. You can't have a profession that only serves 10% of the population and call itself a profession. But with the conveniences that you can and the leverage you can get with AI, you can start profitably working and servicing at a high level people who are not wealthy. You're going to have a different revenue model, and that's another conversation we can pull, another thread, if you will. But I think it's really interesting how the profession is starting to figure out how to work with people who are less wealthy.
Tempted to pull that thread of the fees and the business models that they have, because going towards the lower end of the market, we're going to higher end, or even the back office now being front office, all that has implications on fees, right? Because, if you can get the same amount of work done in less time, then does that mean you reduce fees? Or does the human become the professional that you want to pay more for to give you insight on top of the AI? And so our fees are going to increase. And so I would love to pull that thread on fees if you're up for it.
Yeah, I am. So there's a couple of things. First of all, you talked about the lower end of the market and the higher end of the market. We're going to have to get rid of that terminology. There is no low or high. We are all equal in the eyes of God. God, by the way, is female, in case you were curious about that. And so what we need to start talking about is the fact that nobody thinks of themselves as wealthy. I've never run into a single person in all the upper or lower where somebody said, yeah, I'm wealthy. It's usually people think somebody else is wealthy. That's typically what they talk about. So what I think the profession needs to do is reorient itself to, we're not wealth managers anymore. We are people who help people achieve their goals. And so now you start talking about a dissociation between the fees and the assets under management. And that's probably one of the hardest things the profession is going to have to go through, is to charging fees for service, charging fees based on how much service I'm going to be offering and what profit margin I need to build in as a result of that. And there's two problems with that. One is AUM, assets under management fees, are not easy for clients to assess, and therefore they're easy to charge. It's easier for clients to assess fee for service. What am I getting for what I'm writing a check for? And therefore it's harder to charge that because there's more thinking going on both sides. So, what I'm envisioning is the client who is less wealthy might end up paying more than the client who's more wealthy, not because there's less complexity, but there's just more work. There's more things that person has to do. They haven't gotten their will yet. They haven't started saving. They haven't figured out their budget yet. And so, I do a survey every year, or every other year, I guess, a fee survey. And what I find consistently is advisors don't want to abandon the AUM model. They just don't. And it's going to require it's going to require consumer demand to change the way the fee model at this point.
I think you wrote about this as well, because of all the roll-ups and aggregators that are buying up firms. Their multiples are based on AUM. And so it kind of sounds like that's still keeping people in the AUM fee game, as opposed to pushing them more towards the service fee, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to sell your firm, you have to have a certain source of revenues coming in, and the AUM delivers that. But, some of the most profitable firms in the business are hourly. There aren't many of them, but some very large and very profitable firms have managed to work with clients on an hourly basis. And I ask them, how do your clients feel about having the meter running? And they say either they trust us or they don't. We're not trying to pad our expenses. We work hard for our clients and they trust us and we earn that trust. And if we ever betray that trust, we're out of business. So it's a pretty simple argument. I'm not sure everybody wants to go hourly, but I think it is a possible model.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen in at least in the legal space, the hourly offering or service model is being, I'd say, challenged because of AI. Because of, if I can ask a question and get answers quick and only come to you, my lawyer, with like the bottom line, it'll save me that time. It'll save me the hours I'm going to spend. You can just give me a short answer. That cannibalizes the service fee, right? Because, and I'm assuming it's going to reach the advisory industry, the wealth management industry as well, just as you mentioned earlier, because people or clients are just going to be more comfortable asking their AIs any question they want and just come to the advisor with the bottom line as opposed to consulting with them throughout the process.
Well, the internet did that already. So AI is just going to accelerate that. AI and the internet are encroaching on pretty much every profession. Now, I say every profession. If you call plumbers a profession, it's probably not hurting them very much. Any profession that requires expertise gets a little bit dinged by AI because some of the expertise they have is available out there. Doctors are complaining constantly about the fact that people are coming with their own diagnoses, And you and I know that the most valuable thing you can do for a client is help them articulate their goals, because very few people know what they really want out of life, and help them achieve their goals. And those two things are really beyond the boundaries of what I see as technology right now. And so, I think advisors are less challenged than doctors or lawyers by the advances in artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I want to touch back on something you said a couple minutes ago, which was that the back office team members of a wealth management firm or planning firm will become front office oriented and customer engaging. Do you think that means that people will transition from one job to the other, or the back office administrative jobs will become obsolete and only the front office same team will be able basically to manage the same clients only with back office automations and AI?
Well, you have really a pretty clear distinction between the people who have expertise in financial planning, your CFP or your CPA, PFS, or what have you, and the people who don't. So I don't think the expertise is going to migrate too much from the financial planner, if you will. But the client service is a different issue. And the client service, the interesting thing about the client service is that 90% of what an advisory firm does is service oriented. Only about 10% is creating a financial plan, updating it, keeping track of it. Everything else is really about how do I respond appropriately to the client challenges and client needs. And I think, I'm not sure how to say this. I don't think the financial planner who has the expertise needs to be focused as highly on the service end of it. I think that person, the doctor model, the nurses do all the service, and then the doctor comes in and provides the expertise. We were just in the emergency room yesterday. Interesting story, but outside the boundaries of this. We saw a nurse at various times for roughly an hour, and we saw a doctor for about 5 minutes. And the doctor provided great value in that 5 minutes because he was updated by the nurses, and the nurses, meanwhile, provided great service. I think that's where financial planning is going.
So who do you think are the nurses in the financial planning case?
Well, that's where you have different members of the service team, if you will. It could be a paraplanner, somebody who has some expertise and will acquire more as time goes on and maybe become a full-fledged financial planner. But I think the service, the equivalent of the nurses is the nurses. They'll take your temperature and they'll make sure that you're comfortable in the bed and then in the emergency room, and they'll do the blood pressure thing, and they'll take notes on things. I think those are activities. The AI can take some of the notes, and the back office people can say, all right, what kinds of, you have a problem, you've got to get a down payment on your house out of your account. We need to know what we're going to sell. I want to get back to you on this. I'll be the point person on this, and I'll make sure it happens. That's the equivalent of the nurse. And then the trader can make recommendations, and then that service person can get back to them. So I think what's going to happen really is the people who have been back office, many of them are somewhat nerdy, retentive people who dot every I and cross every T. They're going to have to learn to be more, you're going to start looking for people who are better at working with clients directly. better at interacting with clients directly. It will no longer be somebody who you want to hide in the back office.
So on that point, I have a question. Then, if you're thinking about or talking with a wealth manager who's setting up their shop, or financial planner who's like getting started, would you tell them to hire back office employees or hire the customer facing employees and try to implement as much technology on the back office as possible?
Well, I come from the days early on when the way you hired was you had so much work that you hired somebody and you threw work over your shoulder and that person caught it and did it. We've evolved tremendously out of that. I think the first hire should be somebody who will basically tend to your schedule, your rote paperwork, what have you. And that person needs to be leveraged as much as possible with technology. Doesn't necessarily mean to be AI. And at that point, you start drawing up an org chart. If we had 10 times as many clients and 10 times as much work as we have now, what would that org chart look like? And then you start hiring people who can grow into those roles, maybe one at a time, maybe, two or three at a time, depending on the rapidity of the growth or not. But eventually, you're going to have a staff that's going to specialize somewhat in certain roles, trading and interfacing with a custodian, which custodians are still using like the CPM operating system. So, you're not, AI is going to be totally befuddled by having to navigate what they do. You're going to have a person in that loop. You're going to have a person who knows how to handle the check request through the custodian. But some things will be highly leverageable you might not need. And eventually you're going to need somebody who's going to be able to train younger advisors to become senior advisors. And you're going to have an internal training program, so you're going to have to define the roles you want early on. And that doesn't mean you have to hire those roles, but it does mean you need to kind of know what those roles are. We do a conference every year, and we have the only educational track for back office and operations people. And, that's half the staff of most firms. It's astounding to me that nobody has an ops track. Nobody else has an ops track in their conference because those people are evolving faster than financial planners are.
But they're also the ones that are being disrupted by far by automations and AI at the moment, right? So it's like it might be perceived as a position that will become obsolete faster than others, but you're still saying there's a lack of it because there's still a lot of work on that side, right?
Well, you use the word disruption, and I would rephrase that as leveraged. Advisors are being disrupted. Back office everybody's being disrupted. All of us are. But what that means is that I have opportunities to do more with less of my time. And that's really where the bulk of the changes right now are not on the front office, or in the back office, because the bulk of the changes are giving more opportunities now to people who are doing procedural things rather than meeting with clients. I mean, the note takers are doing a great job of leveraging advisors when they meet with clients. They're more efficient at that. But there's not much more that's leveraging the advisors. We may get better interfaces with the financial planning software. Although I have to tell you, financial planning software is starting to look like glorified spreadsheets at this point. I think we can do a lot better with more interesting technology.
Bob, this is such an interesting conversation. I can go on for hours asking you questions. We are sort of like coming up on time. I do want to ask you another question, but before, and it's more around the how the customer should approach this whole things we're talking about, because we've been talking about how the wealth management and the firm should deal with what's happening, but then there's also the other side of the question. But before I do that, because that will take us some time and probably end with that, is there anything sort of we haven't talked about from the advisor space that you think we should touch upon that would be super interesting for the audience?
Well, I just finished a book that is my personal history of the financial planning profession from 1982 to now. It's forced me to look back and see the inflection points in the profession. And it's really interesting how there were certain inflection points. It was the advent of software and computers. There was the crash of the limited partnership era. There was the .com crash, which devastated people, advisors who followed the herd into tech. There was COVID. Before that, there was the Great Recession. But what I learned through that, and I think this is interesting, is that the advisors who survived and thrived were the ones who never took their eye off of the fact that they fundamentally do financial planning and serve clients. They're not asset managers only. The people who relied totally on asset management were far more efficient until the markets turned against them. And then suddenly people were questioning, why am I paying this person to lose me money? Or why am I paying this person to do something when my real questions haven't been answered? And so over and over again, we've proven that the real financial planners, the people who do real financial planning, which is real caring about client outcomes, are the people that eventually thrive and prosper through thick and through thin. And there's been a lot of thick and a lot of thin.
I need to get my hands on that book. Sounds super interesting. Have you already launched it?
It's it's not out yet. This is what it looks like. It's big and thick, and as you can see, it's huge. Don't drop it on your foot because there's a lot of history. This profession has generated a lot of history.
Yeah. And it's going to generate a lot of history in the future as well, right?
That's
It's
right.
like we don't know where we're going with this, but it's going to be really interesting.
So you're asking about what advice I have for clients?
Yeah.
The interesting thing to me about what if I was a client facing this profession and I didn't know all the things I know now, but if I was looking for a financial planner, I would be the most confused person in the world. I would see websites that say, we do comprehensive financial planning. What does that mean exactly? We put your interests first. Well, what is that? Of course you do. I'm your customer. Why would I otherwise? Why would I think otherwise? All this jargon that advisors throw at you is on the websites and what have you. It's intentionally confusing by the predators. And by that, I mean the commission-based salespeople who have an agenda in the relationship. And the advisors went right along with it and they use the same terminology. And so they have allowed the predators to mingle with the herd. And you can't tell the wolves from the sheep. Actually, the sheep are the more active agents for benefiting clients. I don't think sheep is probably the right word, but the people who are beneficial rather than the people who are not. So the first thing, is you've got to get past the buzzwords. You've got to get past the jargon. You've got to make a real connection with somebody before you trust them with basically your life. And so the things that are non-negotiable for me would be fee only, be willing to make a fiduciary commitment in writing if that's what you ask for, and to have the skills to find out what I really want out of life. Because 90%, 99% of the human population doesn't know that about themselves. And 99% of the human population, most of what they do is for the agenda of somebody else or some other entity, some other organization. They go to work and they work for them, then they come home and their family has obligations, and maybe 1% of it is for them themselves. And a good financial planner is going to be an advocate for them themselves, doing what they want and need in their lives and helping them create that life that they want to achieve. And it's not totally about finances, but I have to tell you, finance is a big part of it because we've created the most god-awful complicated financial system that the human mind could imagine for some reason. I don't know why. So those are the things that I would look for in an advisor, and that has to come through a meaningful conversation with that person that connects with what I want them to do for me and to advise me through.
Yeah, there's always that personal connection, and that's what will keep. That's like the main point why this profession is not at risk as people really think it is. Some people think it is because of that personal connection that people need to have with a human being. Bob, this has been a super interesting conversation, and I can go on for a long time to pick your brain on all the aspects of the industry because of your extensive knowledge. Is there anything sort of last you want to end on, you want to share with the audience before we sort of sign off here?
No, I just have to say after this conversation, I'm thinking I should pick your brain. Maybe we can do an interview at some point because I think you ask very interesting questions and you seem to have a very interesting perspective.
Sure, I'd love to. I appreciate it. We'll take that offline. Well, let's just sign off here and say this was a super incredible conversation. I really appreciate your time, Bob, and thank you all for joining us for Vyzer Visionaries. If anyone wants to connect with you, we're going to put the information in the show notes below, but you have your own website, bobveris.com, so you guys can head over there. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe for more conversations with top wealth leaders. And thanks again. We'll see you all next time.